Hip hop is one of the most controversial genres in the world. It's also one of the most successful. Now look, I think 2022 has been a huge, absolutely monumental year for rap. You've had the much anticipated return of iconic artists like Kendrick Lamar. You've had Drake dropping records. You've had Nas coming back for his infamous trilogy with Hit Boy. You've also had some younger names with very anticipated releases and albums that could really start to define their career, such as J.I.D. And look, I think it's safe to say that mumble rap is officially dead. R.I.P. to the mumble rap era. Hip hop is always changing, always evolving with new trends, but one thing that always remains is lyricism. So I've sat down and put together my list of the top 5 albums that helped define 2022. Now look, we have to put some qualifiers in place. For me, an album that is great will stand the test of time. It's not just listening to it once. When the initial buzz of the album, you first are introduced to some new sounds from your favorite artists, some new lyrics, some new styles. It's how does it sit on the second listen? How does it sit on the third listen and the fourth listen? Do you still connect to it emotionally? Does it still have that substance, those concepts? Does it still open your eyes and make you think about new things listening to it much later? And for me, really classic, great albums will stand the test of time. That is the greatest factor in litmus tests for any musician. So the albums that have made it on this list and that I've been able to review are ones that I've had the opportunity to sit down and listen to thoroughly and to listen to multiple times. As you guys know, I'm an artist myself. I put out my own album this year. I've got many music videos I put out. I'm a content creator as well. I do skits, I do reactions, I do album reviews on this channel. We are always busy. And unfortunately, speaking of time, it's not always a commodity that I can afford. So don't burn the messenger. Don't exile me if your favorite artist or your favorite album this year is not on the list. In fact, please use the comment section to make your argument, to let me know what you guys think and what you are supporting and listening to and bumping for 2022. But that being said, I enjoy breakdowns, I enjoy dissections, and you know what? Let's dive into this list. Number 5 for me is Pusha T's It's Almost Dry. Now listen, one of the biggest complaints I have about Pusha T is his consistency. We know he is just the king of the slow flow. You're always going to get the cocaine chopped up. You're going to get the drug dealer bars from Pusha. But he always seems to find just new ways, new metaphors, and new punchlines to exploit something he's been doing for a very long time. But I feel like if you look at his album track record, especially the earlier albums, they were just lacking in sort of that cohesiveness. Now listen, let's not get it twisted. When Pusha is at the top of his game, he's one of the best MCs doing it. He is absolutely phenomenal. But it's always been a question of can he follow it through and maintain that high level track by track by track. And I feel like this album is really the culmination of that growth. I mean, we are witnessing the evolution of Pusha T as he continues to stay in the game, the longevity that he's had to be around for so long, but the fact that he's still hungry. And you definitely sense that hunger and that feeling and that sentiment on this album. And it obviously helps when you have two of the greatest producers in the game. I'm talking about Pharrell Williams and I'm talking about Kanye West teaming up to come together to produce your album. I mean, Pusha T's been working with Pharrell, the VA connection, for a very, very long time. They've had some incredible hits, and it's just great to see Pharrell and Pusha come together yet again on this album. And I will say, as much as I love Kanye West, my favorite tracks of this album are the ones where Pusha has that chemistry with Pharrell. Let the Smoker Shine the Coops might be one of the greatest and hardest beats Pharrell has ever produced. And it just suits Pusha T's measured, confident, composed, devil-may-care style so well. I mean, listen, even your grandmother, after listening to Pusha T, is going to hit up a Mexican cartel and start pushing weight over the border. One of my personal favorite tracks is Diet Coke, another Pharrell-produced track. Neck and Wrist really shows off that versatility I talked about from Pusha T and that evolution within his flows. He's got a really cool sort of like crack cadence as if he's almost hitting puberty. He finds a really unique pocket to fill. And I mean, fuck it, we've even got Game of Thrones bars. Never thought I'd hear that from a Pusha T album. Speaking of really dope, just cooking in the slow flows, I also really love Call My Bluff as well. I mean, these beats are absolutely frigid. It's like taking a bath in ice water and then chopping up some coke lines to do with you and your mother. That's how I feel when I put on a Clips record and when I put on Pusha T to this day. Possibly one of my favorite bars from 2022 is compared to two martyrs, but I'm chasing moguls, referencing Pac and Biggie and the growth of the businessman that is Pusha T. I Pray For You makes me wish for the reunion of Clips. He's got his brother Malice on this track, and Malice comes through with just an absolute dope feature verse. Overall, it's a very solid showing from Pusha this year. I feel like the allure of him has always been, yeah, we're well aware, he's a drug dealer. He loves to dabble in the illegal, but he makes it so fun. Number 4 introduces us to one of the greatest collab albums of 22. I'm talking about Black Thought and Danger Mouse. Danger Mouse's track record is absolutely incredible. Gnarls Barkley combining with CeeLo Green, I still have that album playing to this day. The Gorillaz album, he just had his fingerprints in so many classics. And you combine that with who in my opinion is one of the top 5 MCs of all time. I'm talking about Tariq Trotter, Black Thought from The Roots, and wow. this is one hell of an album. And speaking of popular fantasy references, I mean, Tariq Trotter pulls out his magic wand on the microphone, dropping the lines, "Prisoners of Azkaban, thinking of a master plan." Wow, J.K. Rowling would be proud. Another great bar comes from his Raekwon feature track, "The Darkest Path." "I came to take back that other 2/5 of a man," which relates to the 3/5 compromise between the North and the South, where they took slaves and counted them as 3/5 of a vote. I mean, honestly, the features throughout this album are incredible. From Raekwon to Joey Badass to Russ to Run the Jewels to even A$AP Rocky, who holds his own on a Run the Jewels track with Black Thought. And I have to mention Belize, which, rest in peace to MF Doom, features him at his prime with some of his just amazing multi-syllabic rhyme schemes. And speaking of rhyme schemes, Black Thought has those throughout this album. He shows off his flow ability, he shows off his cadence, he shows off his rhymes, his thoughtful, poetic, philosophical, metaphysical bars. I mean, you get it all. You never know what path you're going to take when Tariq Trotter gets on a track. Saltwater is a cold, atmospheric boom bap track that features the vocals of Conway the Machine. It's perfect for him, and it's a combination you don't really see happening, but yet, like much of this album, it works, and it comes together beautifully. Number 3 for me is a no-brainer. It's Kendrick Lamar's Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. I mean, honestly, after listening to this album multiple times, I feel like I've been through the most intense psychotherapy of sessions on the couch with Kendrick himself as he just explores just these vulnerable, raw, emotional subjects. Whether it's black identity and context to hip-hop, whether it's the misogyny that runs rampant throughout the culture and how it's affected him, whether it's generational trauma throughout the years dating all the way back to slavery, continuing the cycle of violence, having hurt people hurt other people, rape, loss, suffering, violence. I mean, it has it all on this album. It is incredibly dark, incredibly moody, incredibly heavy, but at the same time, very transformational. I mean, I already did an incredible 4.5-hour review of the album. I split it into 2 different parts. Unfortunately, YouTube blocked it. It still exists on my Patreon. If anyone wants to go see it, I'll put the links to that below. And while a lot of people have critiqued this album, they don't really like the production. Like I talked about, I think the difference between this album and past Kendrick Lamar albums is that it isn't exactly relevant to the here and now. It's not like he's capitalizing on current trends and sounds or doing something that necessarily fits in with the mold of today. I think instead he's gone for something more like taking a play and converting it to the form of rap and converting it to his variation of poetry. And he's really created something that's timeless. I still stand by this. I think a decade from now, 20 years from now, we will look back on this and realize the masterpiece that it is. It's very surrealist rap. It's almost like he's the Salvador Dali of MCs. We Cry Together is a highlight track for me. I think it's an absolute genius way to go about showing the pushes and pulls of a very toxic relationship as represented through a fight that's happening that we're kind of breaking the fourth wall on. Mother I Sober is still one of the most emotionally powerful hip-hop tracks I have heard this year. And yeah, it's that raw honesty that Kendrick has with himself throughout this album. But for me, like any good story and any good plot, there's a turning point and there's a transformation. And what we get at the end of it is Kendrick Lamar essentially setting himself free from a culture that he feels bound by, that he feels like he needs to save, how he deals with his savior complex for it all, freeing himself in terms of how he handles relationships, freeing himself from past traumas, and finding a way forward. I mean, it's inspirational. It's really an incredible personal journey of an album. Number 2 for me is another amazing MC. It's none other than Chicago's Lupe Fiasco and his drill music in Zion. And as the title of the album foreshadows, Lupe just has so many multi-layers and hidden meanings and symbolisms throughout. Drill is in looking at the drill genre of over-the-top violence, of gangsterism that has given birth and risen within the Chicago scene. But also as he goes on throughout this album, there's a greater critique of the violence that is experienced within those communities. So in a way, it's kind of drilling the drill music. Zion, of course, having religious roots and context. Lupe Fiasco really loves to use religious imagery throughout. He talks about God, he talks about religion. This is exemplified through tracks like The Lion's Den, representing Daniel in the Lion's Den. And there's also a relation to Zion as in the Zion that's found within the Matrix, as Lupe sets out on a mission to help protect us and warn us of the dangers of technology and social media addiction and the way that news infiltrates our world, the way it's passed on, the way that we share things and consume information nowadays. But overall, one of the most interesting perspectives on this is how Lupe describes Chicago. And if you look at Chicago, you look at why African Americans first moved into the city. They thought it would be a safe haven. They thought that their culture would be celebrated. Instead, they were segregated. Instead, gerrymandering happened. Instead, institutional racism happened that put them in some of the worst areas. A lot of them couldn't get the mortgages that they needed in middle-class families to move out to the more affluent suburbs. And then all of a sudden, you have the situation where lack of education, over rampant gang violence, lack of opportunities, all kind of comes together to create the scenery and the setting that Lupe depicts for us all to digest. And it's not a pretty picture. It's open, it's raw, it's honest. One of my favorite tracks has to be Miss Mural. I think it's an absolute masterpiece from Lupe. I mean, he starts off with these crazy 10, 11, 12 syllable rhyme schemes, and he just rhymes line for line for line going on. On top of that, it's got an amazing metaphor between a painter and his patron, and it's really a critique of the music industry and of the labels, how they push their artists and constrict the art that their artists create because they're so focused on capitalizing on trends and following what's relevant versus making timeless pieces. It's also a greater metaphysical question of, what is beauty within art? And like any great story, it's got an eye-opening twist. At the very end, Lupe, as the artist, tells the patron to stand on top of his art, lights it all on fire in a blazing pyre of awesome. This is an artist that's operating at an incredibly high level in playing. I mean, this is not an album for feeble minds. And I compared Lupe a little bit to A$AP Rock in that he likes to use his symbolism. He loves to use metaphors that you can interpret in 2, 3, 4 different ways and take in so many directions. But he has a sense of not letting it get too abstract. He always has a way to bring the listener back around to his main message, to his main theme, and kind of keep the track moving along. Overall, I think it's just an incredible album. I can't believe that he put it together in 72 hours. I mean, just the level that he's operating right now. There's a reason why he's teaching at MIT. Now look, we're down to number 1, and I kind of have to cheat and move the goalposts a little bit. I couldn't just give a full number 1. I felt like there were 2 albums this year that really exceeded expectations, that were defining moments for hip hop. So what I'm going to do is kind of a 1A and a 1B. So first is that 1B. I'm going to have to give it to one of the greatest trilogy albums that we have ever heard. This is the culmination, part 3 of an amazing collaboration with Hit Boy. It's Nas's Kings Disease 3. One of my favorite bars of the year, in a Range Rover, dissecting lyrics from Takeover. Sometimes I text Hove like, this ain't over. I mean, come on. Imagine if that beef between Ether and Jay-Z was reignited. That would just be absolutely legendary. And I said this when I did the album review. I feel like Nas is just, he's an old soul. He's a wise spirit. He has so much wisdom to share. He's been through so many great moments. I mean, he grew up in the beef era of hip hop, the great East Coast, West Coast rivalries. I mean, the tales that he can tell. He's like a walking hip hop encyclopedia. And he just has a way of like infusing all that together to have these tracks that entertain you, that you enjoy, that are a great vibe and a great listen, but they teach you at the same time. It's like we're learning about history while at the same time Nas is making history. And sort of uncharacteristic of Nas is the fact that he has dropped 4 albums essentially in the past 4 years. In this trilogy with Hit Boy, I really feel like the chemistry that they have, they've really found something that works. And this is the process and the product of that growing together, of that evolving together, of that getting to know each other and really finding a masterpiece. 30 shows off Nas's flow. I mean, amazing sort of stop-start, accelerated, slowed down schemes. Hood to Hood has one hell of a message. I mean, it's not just about shouting out different hoods. He mentions DC, by the way. Shout out to DC and the hometown within the track. But he also finds a way to bring them together, to try to create this sense of unity, this sense of community, and to find a way forward to overcome the violence within our streets. It's also a homage to the documentary Hood to Hood, and I take it as Nas really wants to redefine what we understand and what the connotations are behind the hood. Once a man, twice a child is just a very clever reflection on age and the cyclical nature of life. You know, we start off, we come into this world as a baby, we need someone else to take care of us. Eventually we mature, we become adults. Well, some of us do, some of us stay kids forever. But later on, we go on to old life, and eventually we get to a point where we can't take care of ourselves again. And in a way, we're kind of a child again. Twice a child, once a man. An amazing bar from that track, you die tomorrow, then you're born again. So life is deathless. Beef is one of the classic songs of 2022. I mean, he very cleverly embodies what is beef. Taking that sentiment, personifying it, and as we talked about, listen, he came from that era. So what better artist to speak on beef and to speak on the toxicity of beef and some of the results that can happen when beef really does get out of hand. Parents of every slain rapper wish I didn't exist is a bar that just hits differently. And in true Nas fashion, you know, he doesn't just speak about beef. He doesn't just take us on a history lesson. He also uses it as a teaching moment. It's definitely the greatest of the 3 Kings Diseases, and I think one of the greatest albums that Nas has put out in the past decade. And for that reason, I'm gonna have to put it near the top. And finally, the greatest album this year. I'm going to have to give that to J.I.D., The Forever Story. Look, I mean, J.I.D. is one of the hottest, freshest, most original artists out right now. We've talked about the unique flows that he finds, how he uses polyrhythms within his schemes to just find these odd rhythmic pockets. And he takes his voice and he uses it as a vocal instrument. He uses it like he's a drummer and just finds these new ways to just enhance tracks. Combine that with his signature laid back, almost I could care less delivery, which sneaks up on you when he drops some hard hitting bars and wordplay. Sprinkle in the moments when he gets conscious, when he speaks out on social issues, and flavor all of that with an amazing storytelling ability. And you have one of the greatest albums of 2022. And I think for me personally, I couldn't be happier for JID. I mean, there was so much pressure on him with this album. He's really trending. He's really growing. There's a lot of eyes, a lot of ears that are tuned in to each and every one of his drops. But the critique and the argument was he didn't really have that album to stand on, like when Kendrick Lamar dropped. He didn't have that defining moment yet. Well, he's finally found that with the Forever Story. And again, another like multi-hour album review that I just deep dive the shit out of that YouTube has blocked. You can find that on Patreon. I'll put the links to that one below. Crack Sandwich is one of my favorite tracks where he uses a metaphorical crack sandwich to help describe sort of the discombobulated, divergent nature of his family dynamic, and yet how there are these underlying bonds of loyalty. I mean, he's one of 7, so it's a big family. It's a crazy family structure and unit, but you can definitely tell that there's love, that there's sentiment, that there's respect for all of them throughout this album. 2007 for me is the culmination of JID's storytelling, when he just comes together to tell us about his personal journey and kind of opens up the window into his career and how he turned from football into one of the greatest MCs that we see currently. And if we're going to shout out bars, one of my favorite bars from this album, let me bear it all when I talk to God. You know, I'm a rant when I talk to Jah, playing off of Jah Morant, talking to Jahs and Jehovah, Yahweh, but also Ja Morant, player of the Memphis Grizzlies, hence the bear it all scheme. Ridiculous wordplay. Can't Punk Me really shows off some amazing fast flows from JID and fellow Dreamville signees Earth Gang. I mean, this album it really does tick all the boxes, from the flows, from the technicals, from the rhyme schemes, to the wordplay, to the storytelling, to the concepts, to the features, to the production. The devil is in the details, and JID has paid very close attention to putting together a very cohesive album that there are no skips from start to finish. And that's why I'm crowning it Rap Album of the Year. But what do you guys think? What was your favorite album? What did you enjoy? How do you feel about my list? Please comment down below. Also, some honorable mentions. I know this was only a top 5 list. I didn't get to do a top 10, but some people that definitely deserve consideration that put out really good albums this year. I'm talking about Stormzy's album. Really love the personal growth and journey from Stormzy on that one. Some dope experimentation with the production as well. Logic's Vinyl Days feels like just a classic that belongs within the chapters of hip hop. I mean, Logic just has such a great ear for sampling, for paying homage to hip-hop classics, for finding a way to take sort of old school, funky styles, boom bap beeps, but make it relevant. Cook it so that it sauces and that it just fits the modern palate and the modern ear. Joey Badass with his 2000 album put out a very, very strong lyrical album. I felt like it was missing a little bit on the production side of things, but just in terms of ability from an MC, I mean, Joey is up there easily. Denzel Curry also continues to grow and continue to show why he is one of the most underrated MCs out there. I've got to shout out his Melt My Eyes, See Your Future. And speaking of Future, I felt like he put out one of his best albums so far. I mean, you want to talk about feeling good to be bad, like Pusha T. Futuristic just like channels his inner misogynistic materialism, I could give a fuck less demon that just spawns straight out of the depths of hell that you just fully want to embrace and just give a hug at the end of the day before you get shot in the face. And yeah, that kind of rounds out the albums for me for 2022. I think we've had an amazing year for hip hop. It's been a very important, a very critical step forward. And one thing I love to see is the celebration of lyricism and kind of getting back to bars that matter, getting back to really dope concepts, getting back to really dope wordplay. As an MC myself, you love, love, love to see it. And I can't wait to see what 2023 holds. If you guys want to be here for the journey, do me a huge favor. Subscribe and notifications on, stick around. You know, we got a lot more to cover and a lot more on the way.